Johnny Carson was halfway through his monologue when he noticed her, a tiny figure in a wheelchair at the edge of the stage, clutching a homemade card against her chest. She wasn't supposed to be there yet. The producers had planned to bring her out during the commercial break, but 6-year-old Sarah Mitchell couldn't wait any longer. She had something important to tell Johnny Carson about heaven, and she was running out of time. November 18th, 1983, The Tonight Show was recording live from Studio One in Burbank. Johnny was delivering his opening jokes about President Reagan's latest press conference, and the audience of 300 was responding with their usual enthusiasm. Ed McMahon was in his spot, delivering his trademark laugh. Doc Severinsen and the band were ready for their cue. Everything was running like clockwork. Then Fred de Cordova, the show's director, appeared at the stage entrance with a look Johnny had never seen before. Something between panic and heartbreak. Behind Fred stood a production assistant pushing a small wheelchair. Inside that wheelchair sat the smallest, most fragile-looking child Johnny had ever seen. Sarah Mitchell weighed just 38 pounds. The neuroblastoma had been destroying her body for 2 years now. The doctors had given her family the news 3 days ago. Weeks, maybe days, not months. Her parents had one choice to make: keep her in the hospital where she was comfortable, or grant her final wish. Sarah's wish wasn't to meet a princess. It wasn't to go to Disneyland. It wasn't to see the ocean or hold a puppy. Sarah wanted to meet Johnny Carson because, as she told her mother in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mr. Carson seems sad sometimes, Mommy. I want to tell him about heaven so he won't be scared." Johnny saw the wheelchair. He saw Sarah's bald head, her oversized sweater covering a body that was giving up, her eyes that looked far too wise for a 6-year-old. He stopped mid-sentence. The audience fell silent, confused by the interruption. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice already different from his entertainer's tone, "we have a very special guest joining us a little earlier than planned. I hope you'll bear with me for a moment." Johnny walked to the edge of the stage and knelt down beside Sarah's wheelchair. The cameras followed him, not sure if this was planned or not. 20 million viewers at home watched as Johnny Carson met Sarah Mitchell. "Hi there, sweetheart," Johnny said gently. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. I'm 6 3/4." Johnny smiled, but anyone watching could see the emotion already building behind his eyes. 6 3/4 is a very important age. "What brings you to the Tonight Show, Sarah?" Sarah held up her homemade card. Construction paper, crayons, glitter that was already falling off, a child's drawing of an angel with a smile. "I made this for you, Mr. Carson, because I'm going to heaven soon, and I wanted you to know it's okay." The studio audience gasped. Some people started crying immediately. Ed McMahon's face crumpled. Johnny took the card with trembling hands. "Thank you, Sarah. This is beautiful." Johnny's voice was already thick. "Can you tell me about heaven?" And that's when 6-year-old Sarah Mitchell did something extraordinary. She began describing heaven with the certainty of someone who had already seen it. "It's really pretty there, Mr. Carson. There's no more owies, and you can run and play all day. My grandma is there, and she's waiting for me. She told me in my dream last night." Sarah's voice was weak but clear. "And you know what the best part is?" "What's the best part, honey?" Johnny asked, barely holding himself together. "In heaven, everybody gets to do what makes them happy forever. So I'm going to paint pictures and play with puppies. And you can tell jokes and make people laugh just like you do here. Except in heaven, nobody ever gets sad after they laugh." Johnny Carson, the man who had maintained perfect composure through 3 decades of live television, started crying. Not subtle tears, real shoulder-shaking sobs. He tried to speak and couldn't. He looked at Sarah, this dying child who was comforting him instead of the other way around. "Why aren't you scared, Sarah?" Johnny finally managed to ask. "Because, Mr. Carson," Sarah said with the wisdom of someone far older, "being scared of heaven is like being scared of your birthday party. You know it's going to be good. You just haven't opened the presents yet." The audience was openly weeping now. Camera operators were wiping their eyes. Even the hardened crew members who had seen everything were breaking down. This wasn't entertainment. This was a 6-year-old child teaching America about faith, courage, and acceptance. Johnny reached out and took Sarah's hand. It was so small in his, so fragile. "Sarah, you are the bravest person I've ever met, and the wisest." "My mommy is brave too," Sarah said. "She cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. Can you tell her something for me, Mr. Carson?" "Anything, sweetheart. Anything you want." Sarah looked directly at the camera, as if she knew her mother was watching from the hospital waiting room where the staff had set up a television. "Mommy, don't be sad when I go. I'll save you the best cloud, and I'll ask God to send you butterflies so you know I'm okay. Yellow ones, because those are your favorite. Barbara Mitchell, watching from the hospital chapel, collapsed into the arms of a nurse. Her baby, her 6-year-old sunshine, was saying goodbye on national television with more grace than most adults could manage in a lifetime. Johnny couldn't continue with the show. He signaled to Fred de Cordova to extend the segment indefinitely. The commercials could wait. The scheduled guests could wait. This moment, this child, this lesson in courage was more important than anything else. "Sarah," Johnny said, composing himself enough to speak clearly, "can I ask you something that I've been wondering about?" "Okay, Mr. Carson. Do you think the people we love can see us from heaven? Can they watch over us?" Sarah nodded with absolute certainty. "Oh yes, God has special windows up there. They're made of clouds, but you can see through them perfectly. My grandma told me she watches my mommy every day. She's very proud of how strong mommy is being." "And what about when people miss someone who's in heaven? What should they do?" "They should talk to them," Sarah said simply. "Just because someone goes to heaven doesn't mean they stop listening. When my mommy misses me, I want her to tell me about her day. I'll hear her. I promise I'll hear her." Johnny wiped his eyes again. "You know what, Sarah? I lost my son. His name was Rick, and he died in a car accident. I think about him every single day. Do you think he can hear me when I talk to him?" The audience held its collective breath. Johnny Carson had never spoken publicly about his son's death. It was the wound he carried in silence, the pain he never shared with America. But here, in front of this dying child who spoke about heaven with such certainty, the wall came down. "He hears you, Mr. Carson," Sarah said with such conviction that everyone watching believed her, "and he wants you to know he's not hurt anymore. In heaven there are no car accidents. There's no pain. He's happy, and he's waiting for the day you can tell him jokes again in person." Johnny Carson completely broke. He pulled Sarah into the gentlest hug, careful of her fragile body, and sobbed into her shoulder. This 6-year-old child, weeks away from death, was comforting one of the most famous men in America about a loss he'd carried for years. "Thank you, Sarah," Johnny whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that." When Johnny finally pulled back, he looked at the audience, then at the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, I started this show tonight thinking I'd tell some jokes and interview some celebrities. Instead, I've just met the most remarkable person I've ever had the privilege of knowing. Sarah Mitchell has taught us all something about courage, faith, and grace." He turned back to Sarah. "Can I make you a promise?" "What promise, Mr. Carson?" "I promise that every time I see a yellow butterfly, I'll think of you and your mommy, and I'll remember what you taught me tonight about heaven not being something to fear, but something to look forward to." Sarah smiled, the biggest smile her weak body could manage. "That's a good promise, and I promise that when I get to heaven, I'll tell your son Rick that his daddy is the best joke teller in the whole world." What happened next wasn't captured entirely by the cameras, but those who were in the studio that night would never forget it. Johnny Carson did something he had never done in 22 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He invited the entire audience to come down to the stage, one by one, to meet Sarah Mitchell. For 40 minutes, while the show remained paused, 300 people lined up to shake Sarah's hand, to hug her gently, to tell her she was brave. Some brought her flowers from the decorative arrangements around the studio. Others gave her their jewelry, their watches, anything they had that might make her smile. Sarah received each person with the same grace, thanking them, sometimes offering them her own words of comfort. One elderly woman knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair and whispered, "My husband is in heaven. Can you tell him Margaret still loves him?" Sarah nodded seriously. "I'll tell him the first thing when I get there," she promised. Johnny stood to the side, watching this spontaneous moment of human connection, tears still streaming down his face. Ed McMahon came over and put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. Neither man spoke, they didn't need to. When the last audience member had met Sarah, Johnny made an announcement that shocked everyone. "I'm establishing the Sarah Mitchell Foundation tonight. It will help families with children fighting cancer, and it will make sure that every child who wants to share their story gets heard. Because Sarah taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths." Sarah lived for 12 more days after that Tonight Show appearance. Johnny called her every single day, sometimes twice a day. When she was too weak to talk, he would tell her jokes while Barbara held the phone to her ear. On the last day, when Sarah could barely whisper, she used her final words to tell Johnny, "Don't forget about the yellow butterflies." Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell passed away on November 30th, 1983, surrounded by her family, holding the card she had made for Johnny Carson. At her funeral, over 2,000 people attended, including Johnny Carson, who spoke at the service. He talked about how a 6-year-old child had taught him more about life, death, and faith in 20 minutes than he'd learned in 58 years. True to his word, Johnny established the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, which over the next 22 years would provide over $50 million in support to pediatric cancer families. He never spoke about it publicly. It was only discovered after his death in 2005, when his estate revealed the extent of his private charitable work. For the rest of his life, Johnny Carson wore a small yellow butterfly pin on his lapel during every Tonight Show episode. When asked about it in interviews, he would smile and say, "It's a reminder from a friend." Those who knew the story understood. Years later, Barbara Mitchell said in an interview, Sarah was scared of dying until she met Johnny Carson, not because of who he was, but because he let her be the teacher for once. He gave her a purpose in her final days. She didn't die as a victim. She died as a messenger of hope. On Johnny's final Tonight Show episode in 1992, someone in the audience released hundreds of yellow butterflies into the studio. Johnny saw them, touched his lapel pin, and mouthed the words, "Thank you, Sarah." If this story of unimaginable courage and grace touched your heart, honor Sarah's memory by subscribing and sharing this message of hope. Tell someone you love about the lesson a 6-year-old taught America, that heaven isn't something to fear, but a place where love continues forever. Drop a comment about someone who taught you about courage, and remember that sometimes the smallest angels leave the biggest impact. Because Sarah Mitchell proved that you're never too young to change the world, and you're never too powerful to learn from a child.